Have a good meeting.
Thank you.
Good evening. This is the Wednesday, March 29th, 2023 meeting of the Finance Committee of the Town of Paxton. Thank you for attending. Thank you for joining us. And with those opening remarks, we're going to begin our meeting. And we're going to do so by reviewing the meeting minutes of the meeting held a week ago on March 22nd. Those meeting minutes have been circulated to everyone by our very capable committee clerk, who once again has done a fine job. Don't mean to preempt anybody's review, but is there a motion? Is there need for discussion? What's your wish?
I make a motion to approve the minutes from the 3/22/23 meeting.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. They pass again. And as I alluded to at the beginning, these are difficult meetings to capture everything that transpires, and Tony does it masterfully. So thank you again for a great job. On the, and I'd like to thank my colleague this evening, Jeremy, for assisting me here up front. We're trying to not only make the presentation thorough and transparent, but maybe offer a little bit to the viewers of these meetings who oftentimes hear us speak, but hearing us speak of numbers and trying to visualize what it all means is sometimes challenging. So in a small way, we think what's going to be presented on the screen this evening is going to be helpful. If you if I could beg your indulgence, what I would like to do is to take the lead on item number 4, which is essentially to review the all matters having to do, item number 4 on our agenda, all matters having to do with the budget. And I have included, and everyone here this evening, those of you in the audience, there's an extra copy if you might like it. If you'll excuse me for a minute. And in the package that you have, I purposely put what I'd like to put on the screen right now as the very last item. Don't mean to try to be your parent or your professor here, but I thought I might lose somebody if it was the first item that you saw. So it's way in the back, listed as item 15. So with that, Jeremy's going to show it on the board, and this is mindful of what we've talked about so many times in the last few weeks, that we're dealing with a $444,000 deficit. And many of you in the room on the Finance Committee have been good enough to submit to me good ideas in terms of where budget cuts might be appropriate to make. There were no bad ideas, and I don't mean to diss on those bad ideas at the moment by saying what I'm about to say, but $100 here and $350 here and $500 there doesn't amount to $444,000. So what we're presenting here is the idea that we don't really think, or certainly I don't anyways, and I know a lot of you agree, we can't cut our way to a balanced budget. And the second premise that I've listed on this slide is that we've all said it, we've all heard it, the need oftentimes to think outside the box. Again, forgive me for saying, but I'm not always sure that we actually do that. And I think this year, with the unprecedented historic level of our deficit, basically, we need to think outside the box. So what I've got listed here, and not that Jeremy would scroll down the screen, but there's about 15 items. The good news is I'm not going to pontificate on every single of the 15, but one of the items is to ask all of us, including Heather, who's here this evening, to just make sure that on the state aid side, as it relates to the town, there are state budgets, there are state appropriations, there's a lot of moving pieces, and we just need to know that our starting point in terms of what is currently in our budget for our particular state aid is the right number. Not suggesting that you need Heather to comment on any of this contemporaneous to their being mentioned, but just kind of laying the groundwork. We've also had two, by almost any standard, wonderful presentations as recent as this Monday by the Wachusett Regional School District Superintendent and the Bay Path School Superintendent. But once again, is the state funding that is reflected in those particular budgets, which in turn accrues to us in terms of our assessment, is that the final number? And again, question posed that may not necessarily be able to be asked. Answered. You'll also see listed third is an item called excess and deficiency. Don't mean to offend anybody by their not knowing what it is, but that was the focal point of the Wachusett Regional School District presentation, in which case they smartly but conservatively did not budget for any of that particular money, which is to the tune of $850,000, which, if broken out and down and into the 5-member towns, could basically be a substantial amount of savings and benefit to the town of Paxton. At that evening, I asked what that $850,000 could be quantified in terms of coming forward and forth to the town of Paxton. Don't want to answer it by the way I'm about to answer it, but I'm not sure I got an answer in terms of dollar amount. I got an answer in terms of percentage amount, that our 4.19 could fall all the way, certainly below 4%, maybe as far as 3.7%. I've conservatively thrown a number out there in terms of that could be $32,000 of additional relief in our assessment, which is going to take away from our $444,000 deficit that we're working with. There's also the item here of grant funding. And by the way, that excess and deficiency is a single sheet in your package. It's labeled item number 9, and all of these are labeled in the lower right-hand corner. They're circled because there could be a form that has a number of numbers and a number of page numbers, so I'm identifying those with our presentation this evening. But as you also know, the police dispatch budget is at least $70,000 higher this year, which is added to the $444,000 deficit that we're experiencing. And unofficially, informally, and only partially, Heather and I have spoken about whether or not we've exhausted all the funding, grant funding opportunities there, or whether or not something is still available to us. You'll note I put TBD, to be determined. I didn't dare risk putting a number and associating with it, but and maybe the comeback is the answer is 0 to all of those TBAs. But the question is, can we look at them? Can we take it a step further? Can we exhaust every possibility and wring everything out of the sponge that we can to help impact that $444,000 deficit? Keeping in mind that the $70,000 that hits the budget this year is going to be $25,000 worth next year, 25% rather, worse next year and 25% worse the year after that. So that's going to become a big number, and why not exhaust what the possibilities are at this particular point? Then, in item 5 listed here, this has been a mantra of a lot of us on the Finance Committee for a number of years, and that is, we look at the budgets, we look at the departments, we look where we can cut, but is there a possibility for any increase in our revenue here? I don't want to upstage Heather, because I think she has some good news in a minute, but here's the calculation that you see here. The 1,297,010 is a number that has been budgeted for 3 years at least in a row. And what I'm suggesting is that, is it possible for those fees and all the things that generate that particular revenue, which, by the way, is number 1 on your particular list in your package, and you can see it's about 25 to 30 individual items that make up that 1,000,002. And I led with my chin and said, well, what if we just multiplied that by 2.5%? Is it possible that that revenue can increase by 2.5%, which would be about $32,000, I'm rounding up, excuse me for doing that, of which the current budget already reflects a $14,000 increase. So is it possible that there's another $18,000 left, pardon the expression, chicken on that bone? And Heather, I don't know, is it the right time to turn it to you and let you share the good news that was discovered in the last couple of days?
Sure. So we were reviewing all of the revenues as we were asked to do. I reviewed the numbers again today with Larissa to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. She's always a good person to make sure that we got everything right. So we did go through all of the state aid numbers to make sure the cherry sheet, it hasn't been updated yet. It's still just the original proposal. All those numbers are accurate and correct. And we did the local receipt numbers as well as the additional funds, and just went back and double checked to make sure we have the school debt override, excluded debt, incorporated into those pieces. And in doing so, it looks like my final calculation with all those pieces double checked comes to $15,628,529, and the original sheet that I think we were working off of, I think, had a lower number in it, and the number was, if I can find my original sheet here. $15,516,049, which the difference in the local revenue was our calculations, which have been pretty steady since February, with the exception of, when state aid came out, we adjusted those numbers and other numbers were adjusted, but pretty much on target. Stays at, local aid, $1,426,333, and the number on the sheet, the most recent updated sheet I had was $1,311,456. So it's a little over $100,000 in the positive on the local receipt side. So, as exciting as that is, just keep in mind, one number that is much higher than last year is the charges for service for the trash fee, because we're going out to bid. But again, that number's a wash, right? If we put 0, we would offset it on the other side, and the expense side 0. Put $1 million, we'd offset it on the other side. But I don't think that's where the difference necessarily came from. I think it was likely just a typo in the number there. And maybe with everything getting updated, that one might have not been updated at the same time, so that's good news, right? So that means that Mark's higher figure than made me happy or comfortable of 416 is significantly less, by less than 316, that we have to make the difference of.
So in 15 minutes of the meeting, we've cut the budget by 100,000, so 45 minutes from now, we'll have a balanced budget. So if things keep trending, so that's great news, so thank you very much. The the first page that is in everybody's packet, Heather, is it possible for you to update that? Because that was a very useful schedule, but the latest one I think most of us have is as of December 31st.
Yeah, we can get that out to everyone. Larissa does these, she usually waits till about halfway through the month. So at this point, the most updated I have is the end of February. I don't know if I can see if I have it on me. She might have given me that one.
So I'm going to continue while you look. So on this particular schedule, you'll also see new growth. I spared everybody the slash, new growth slash Mark Love's Memorial topic every single year, but that happens to be one that I focus on. And in your package, number 2, there's a schedule that needs to be updated, but nevertheless has been circulated in prior years, and in which case formally, not currently, but formally, we used to budget $35,000 for new growth when it was $150. Then we budgeted $50,000 when it was again $150. Then in 2020, we budgeted 61 and it was 120. So it always struck me that we were under budgeting this particular number, which I know conservative budgeting on revenue is a constant frame here. But on the other hand, if that leads us to cutting somebody's budget by that amount of money when we didn't have to do that, I'm just suggesting that we get that particular number right. Currently, we have $75,000 budgeted in it. I was advocating on this schedule, which, by the way, I have my initials at the bottom of this, so I'm not trying to take credit, but I'll take all the blame for it. I'm suggesting, can it be looked at? Can it be looked at? Not legislating to the assessor's office, but can it be looked at and increased to $90,000? A year ago, we budgeted 65 and we realized 96,000. Can we, if we're budgeting 75,000 this year, isn't 90,000 realistic? Or maybe a higher number, but just leading with my chin there. The ambulance fund, I've included the special revenue funds for you in your package, which is item number 3 in the bottom right-hand column. Again, this is an ask. This is not a directive from the Finance Committee, but we have historically seen about 300,000 out of that particular ambulance fund for as long as I can remember being a member here. A year ago, it tweaked up to 310. This year, the budget reflects 350. I'm basically suggesting, can it absorb another $50,000 and bring it up to $400,000? Keeping in mind that that doesn't deplete that particular fund. It has a beginning balance of $500,000, and it currently has a healthy balance as well, including what has been earmarked to be given to us. So I don't want to say revolving fund because that's a misspeak, but there's money constantly coming into this particular fund. So that would be of a great help to our budget deficit if the fire chief and the EMS people can take a look at it. Maybe they say we can't, but we're making the ask, asking them to take a look at it. The next item is number 8, tree warden. I've included in a package item number 7. There's a lot to that particular package. It's a stapled package of 3 pages. I want to direct your attention to the 3rd piece of paper, which is the town caucus results, in which case nobody, at least to my knowledge, and at least as of the town caucus, if you look at the bottom of the page, nobody is running for that particular elected position. The second piece of paper is the town's chart of organization, which no one's fault, just making an observation. If you look at the chart of organization in the upper right, the tree warden, of which we have significant tree management issues, didn't report to anybody. And this particular chart of organization with that particular item is circa 1913. So it struck me anyways that we ought to consider, with the opportune time now where nobody's running for the position, to maybe reorganize it, which takes me back to the first page. I did a study, and unfortunately, this study is 4 years old, because I tried to advance this idea 4 years ago, that almost every other community, their town warden is somebody in the DPW department or the municipal light department. And maybe if we did that, by virtue of my word reorganize here, there could be some savings that could be made by moving it to a different department. I think it's an opportune time. If it was to box somebody out of a particular position, I probably wouldn't take that particular stance, but the door is open, and maybe we should walk through it and see what is possible. Again, Heather, none of these looking to be answered tonight, we're just putting them out there. Opera, if you take a look at your package and that I've circulated to you, in particular, item number 10, there is some money that is left currently in the Opera Trust Fund. There's about $8,800 that's not earmarked. So you might ask, well, where am I coming up with $18,000? But if you look at some of the items in terms of their status, I focused on the electronic signs, which appear to me to be mostly done, and there's $10,000 left residue there. So maybe there's $18,000 that could come to give us some relief on our particular budget in any number of areas for them to subsidize. The next grouping on the screen up above, 10, 11, 12, and 13, unfortunately, at some point, we're going to need to go to the particular departments in order to help us relieve the $444,000 deficit, and I basically have made reference to police and fire, and if you look at, and sorry the way they're numbered, but they really weren't in the order of this being prepared, but in item number 3, you see the special revenue funds, and if you can find your way to fire, pretty much in the middle of that particular page, and police at the lower part of the page, that they have some money that they use, and the question to be asked here is that could some of that in this critical year be used to help give us relief to their own department, to help us balance this 444, which is now 344 budget deficit. They enjoy great support from the community in terms of, as you can see, the donations. Don't mean to take away from that, but the truth of the matter is that that's generated by our funding their particular department to the level that we do for them to be able to give that great service. Don't want to take anything away from them, but, you know, is it possible, always in the form of a question, that something could be coming back this year greater than perhaps in prior years? And then just because they happen to be the three-legged stool, police, fire, and DPW, I just picked a number up there by reducing, which this was probably the hardest one for me to put up on that screen, to suggest a reduction in DPW by $5,000, because I personally think they're understaffed and under-equipped. So maybe that one is one we don't act on. The next one is taking into account that all of the Finance Committee members have made all kinds of good suggestions, and maybe at some point we go through all the departments and make those $250, $350, $400 cuts, and maybe it will raise to the level of 10 grand, and we've got some real money, and we're on our way to a balanced budget. 14 and 15, I'm not gonna lie to you, are probably shocking a couple of people, but if you scroll down a little bit further, Jeremy, if you don't mind, I'm taking ownership to it in the bottom right. So this is me. But I'm a big advocate of selling town property, and front and center on that is 10 West Street, which is owned by the town, which is occupied right now. I believe there's a willing buyer for this, so there's somebody in the market. We receive $400 a month in rent, which is $4,800 a year. I don't see where that does us any good, whereupon selling it could do us a lot of good. And I also think that there are some problems heading in that building's direction in terms of some infrastructure needs, the need for a new septic system, and that's why I've just thrown up there buyer credits. Haven't spoken with a realtor, not looking for a commission on the sale. I'm just saying, can we look at this? Is this a possibility? It doesn't seem to be doing us much good on the budget side. I'll also jump ahead and say that there are others that are gonna say that we need that building, because when we expand and renovate the town hall, that is gonna be impacted by it. And I would submit to you, being on the Capital Improvement Planning Committee, if that's not 10 or 15 years out, then I don't know what is, because I'm sure the DPW building should and will take precedent over that. So that's why I've thrown that up there. And then let me just finish this last one, Bill, if you don't mind. The command car, keeping in mind that we have two, and when we bought two, we had a police chief and we had essentially a chief of EMS. They've now merged into one department. So the question is, do we need two command cars if it's now one department? Not going to pontificate in terms of how that came to be, but asking the question, is that something that they can do without? And then the last, just to get me closer to $444,000, I basically said, you know what? The stabilization fund, which is sitting at 438, which I believe is an old number, because I think it's closer to 440, 441. We should have $1 million, but $1 million we don't have, and 440 is not doing us much good. Can we steal a little bit for this one particular year to help stabilize things, which is the essence and the need and the name behind the stabilization fund? I picked for $38,000 just to keep the balance above 400,000, which just seemed to have a nice ring and a more acceptable level to it. And even with that, notwithstanding Heather's good news 20 minutes ago, we still were a ways to go, but these are things I think we need to exhaust, and maybe it's no, all the way down the line. But I think it's our obligation as a finance committee to put them out there and ask them and have them be discussed. Bill, I'm gonna, and then at the end, this is what it allows. It allows us to support Wachusett Regional School District. I don't think that there's anybody that was here that evening or who has watched it or will watch it was not moved by the compelling presentation made by the superintendent. They need, he made an ask for what they need, not what he wants. Right now, we're sitting at I always say 4.18, and somebody corrects me, it's 4.19. I don't know actually to this day which one it is, but I think with the excess and deficiency, it's going to drop to the 4% or below, which is where everybody wants this budget to live. Bay Path, the same thing. I've included in your package. Bay Path also made a compelling presentation, but if you if you bear with me and want to find item number 14 in your particular package. I don't believe it's 14, and give me a minute as to what number it is, but there is one in there for Bay Path, if you'll allow me to flip through and find it. It happens to be number 8, thank you. You think, oh my God, Bay Paths went up 13.85%, and I led with my chin and asked this question Monday night, and they said, yeah, but the minimum contribution is 20% of it. And you have no say in the minimum contribution. So when you take that out of the equation, Bay Path was extremely fair in their assessment that they passed on.
We also are increasing our number of students by 15%.
Correct.
Correct.
Correct. And then also allows, I need to be careful speaking at all about COLA because of a conflict of interest, so I'm just going to leave it alone, and I'm going to interject a personal item. I'm in favor of an override as the absolute positive last resort. I don't think that there's an appetite for that because it impacts our taxes, and 3 finance committee members ago, we made a presentation in terms of how our taxes were high enough already, and an override would just add to that. So this was a version of out-of-the-box thinking and trying to get us to a balanced budget. So not suggesting we've done it this evening, but I'd love for all of these items to be talked further about and exhausted, and maybe some good will come of it. Maybe we'll be disappointed by some. But at least we've done our due diligence and we've asked the question and got the answer and moved on. Tony, did you have a question?
Nope.
No? Anybody from the Finance Committee? There's somebody in the public. Would you allow me to recognize him? Bill, go ahead.
Bill Trotter, 12 Stormy Street. Actually, 2 questions. Do they still store the records in the cellar of 10 West Street? I believe they store them over there. Remember, Carol? They were all brought over there. That's why if you rented the place, you couldn't get use of the cellar. Do we know if they're still there?
I'm not aware if there's anything there. If it is, it's beyond my knowledge.
Yes, yes, they haven't been removed since I left. There's still some records, but I think we could probably accommodate them.
Okay, so if we move those out, because if you're stuck with those records and no place to put them, kind of puts the problem on the sale.
Keeping in mind, we do have a records building that has been tastefully TLC'd and improved and getting a new roof, and don't want to go in an area where I don't know all the information, but maybe that's an option. And I would think
The second
other
question-
facilities that we have, we could, if that was the preventiveness from selling it, I think we could find
Right.
other locations for it.
'Cause I remember when they first put them in, that was about the only spot we had at the time. My second question was, earlier in the presentation, you talked about a $70,000 item that might become a deficit. Do you recall that earlier?
Yeah, the regional dispatch,
Right, regional dispatch.
there's $70,000 in that budget this year that was not in at all last year.
Okay, so my question is, if that comes to fruition, then we gotta add that 70 back in to the 344, which will bring us up to 414.
No, it's in
It's in,
there.
okay, thank you so much.
I would try to bring the 70 down
Okay.
by way of a grant of some sort.
One question, you think at some point when we get to the high-end saturation point, we might look at going back to our own dispatch and might be able to do it cheaper?
Well, I'll let Heather comment.
The state won't allow that. So the state has pushed very much towards regional dispatch, and I've had lots of conversations with State 911 over the past 9, 10 months, and it's come up a number of times, and it would be very disadvantageous to even consider doing, because they wouldn't they wouldn't give you the same grant opportunities, right? They would pull a lot of the funding that some who are currently still standalones get, just because they're pushing towards regional.
Okay, thank you, Heather.
So certainly want to let Heather and Carol comment on some of this, all of this,
Sure.
any of this.
Sure. I can go down the list if that's okay, just because it's easy to follow. Jeremy, would you? You're on it. Awesome. All right, so the first one was state aid. So as we know, this is the cherry sheet as it was currently submitted by the governor. There's been no additional action or posted action on it yet with any next steps. So those numbers are currently what they are. If anyone remembers when I did the revenue projections for the forecast, some of my numbers in those calculations were higher and they came in lower, and some vice versa, but good news is it all kind of balanced out at the end of the day, so we were good. I was happy about that, or as happy as I was gonna be. State funding for schools, so again, you know, we don't know what we don't know until we know. Sorry, it's just the way it is, and that might not even be till post, you know, town meeting, in fact. Excess and deficiency, so as of right now, if things go well, they're looking at being able to potentially have things certified on April 15th, which is good because we're meeting Select Board and FinCom on, I believe it's April 24th, 27th, 24th, I think it is, to finalize the warrant and all of those pieces. So that would give additional time to move anything, but my recommendation would be is if the FinCom was considering using operating stabilization, I would just currently add that into that number at the very end if you have to, and then take it out at town meeting on the motion. Because I don't know, right? They seemed a little wishy-washy on Monday about the 15th.
About the April 15th date, they said could be as far as May 1st.
And then the other thing is, I think it might be, even if it does get certified in time, I think it might go back and forth between the administration and the school committee a few times. The impression that I get is that the administration is very much in support of pushing it out to the schools, and that one school committee meeting that we attended, it seemed like there was some resistance potentially to necessarily pushing it all back out to the towns. So, that's nothing that you guys don't already know, I don't think. Grant funding, police and dispatch, so Mark, I don't know if I can get the dispatch number down any more than it is. I tried having the debate over the population, the numbers they used, and at the end of the day, I think it ended up increasing my, my assessment by $400. So in my efforts, we did spend lots of time with Holden talking about calls for service and the numbers they use, and we're still trying to get historical data and information on what they calculated the year past and still trying to debate it. But at this time, I think for where we're at right now, we're gonna be stuck at close to 70K. I think the current number they gave me was 69.5. So, local revenues. So again, as I had mentioned earlier, as Mark pointed out, so our revenues are higher than what we have in the predicted piece. So how we calculated that, in case anyone wants to know, I know we did this a little bit, and I can send this sheet over to Mark so he has it. Larissa and I just went over this last week to double check, and we went over again today. So we look at FY20, 21, and 22 actuals for the budget for revenues, and then we look at our FY23 estimates, but we don't look at what we submitted to the state. We look at what we thought we were building the budget on, right? And the reason we do that is because when we do the recap, many times we'll reduce some of those numbers if other numbers came out higher than we expected. So we end up playing with the numbers at the end of the day to make the math work. But that doesn't help us when we're trying to figure out what were we thinking and what were we calculating. So we use the numbers we were originally calculating as the base in 23, and then we look at 24. What we also did when we came up with these numbers, and we looked at, Mark had the printout, but December 31st, what the actuals were at that point, understanding that some numbers you don't get till later on, right? So when we're collecting excise taxes, it's a great one, that's under other taxes and excise. we don't actually know what we're fully gonna collect until about halfway through April, right? A lot of the excise tax bills go out in March. As of last week or so, I think, or the end of February, we're at about 54%, give or take, of the collections of what we had predicted, but that was, I think even a little bit less than 705 at the end of the day is the number that was on the sheet. So you always have to keep that in mind, right? The number on the sheet is what we actually submitted to the state, not necessarily what we thought we were gonna collect. So you have to kind of cross-reference. And that being said, you know, usually those funds will come in March, plus we just did the demands for those. So we will not actually really see what we have in that and how we're doing on that substantially until the end of April. The other thing to keep in mind is for years, you used to always be able to kind of count on that number going up year over year. But 20's actuals were 703, 21 was 741, 22 dropped to 722 as actuals. So we had to be very cautious that we weren't getting too overly excited. And motor vehicle excise tax is usually one of those most of the time you can count on being a little bit higher. But I know, Mark, you had brought up, you know, trying to get the numbers as close as you can, but our concern, right, is we gotta balance out things that if they don't get high enough, we need stuff to make sure they do, so we at least generate the revenue. And the other piece is usually we can guarantee a little bit of money, whether it's a couple of, 10,000 or so to generate for free cash. Because we are still trying to look to generate some free cash for the next year, or we're in more trouble than we are right now. So that's that. I guess I'll just go through a couple of these real quick here, see if there's any other changes. Interest for motor vehicle, interest, we increased it from our original projections of $3,220 to $5,000. As of February 28th, those numbers were at $3,796. So we had originally thought it was only gonna be, in the 3s or 4s at the most, and we increased that to 5. Pilots, we have an actual calculation this time of how to get to the pilots. We've documented all of those pieces in this document so that we know what we're doing next year when we look at those numbers. Trash fees, as I mentioned earlier, that just has to do a matter of the wash of those pieces. We had looked at all the fees on the revenue calculation sheet for a town clerk, dog licenses, collectors, a butters list, and so forth. And as of last week, you know, when we were looking at them, we're kind of hitting where we expect to be this time of the year. A couple of them are a little bit low, but when we looked at each of the numbers, we weren't super comfortable with going any higher. Rentals, you know, that's $4,000 for 10 West, that's the only property we rent. Cemeteries is a hit or miss. In years, FY20 was only 13,800, 21 was 19,000. 22 was around 19,000, 23 we estimated 15,000, and right now we're still below that number. Not to say we won't get there, but you don't really know until you know. Licenses and permits, we did increase by $350 because the select board added a $50 fee for one-day liquor licenses, and we get about half a dozen a year from AMC. So we did add that number in. So that's an increase of $350, Mark. Don't get too excited. Building permits, you know, we're seeing building numbers still be lower than what we've expected them in the past couple of years. In FY20, we pulled in 25,000. FY21, we did well at 37. FY22, we pulled in 30,000. And this year we budgeted at 30,000, and I don't remember the more recent numbers, but they're not much higher than they were in December. What were they in December on the sheet? Weren't they around?
14,880.
What was it?
14,880.
So they're not showing lots of love right now, but hopefully the spring season will pick them up. But that number for us is a little concerning. Fines and forfeits, again, those things kind of vary between what's happening. Who's turning stuff in, who's not, what we're doing for enforcement, and it kind of vary. An example would be court fines. In FY20, court fines from the police department was 31,000, FY21 was 12,000, FY22 was 16,000, and 23 we estimated 12,000. They're all kind of being, you know, up and down. Investment income, we did increase that from when we originally did this projection in February. So as of December 31st, the numbers were around 5,764. Now they're a little bit higher because, interest started picking up again. So we figured, we could get to 8,000, no problem, for FY25. Let's see, miscellaneous, that all stays the same, and non-recurring, we're not allowed to budget for that.
What is the sale of equipment, 8,000?
Thus far this year?
Yeah.
That is the surplus equipment from the fire department.
Was
We
that the
talked
other
about
car?
this- No, it was,
Okay.
remember when we talked about getting the new fire engine?
Yes.
We talked about the difference between having them have trade-ins versus selling it outright, right? The salvage value, or the value of the metal, was only gonna get us about $3,000. So we talked about it when I first started, the select board declared it surplus, and we sold it for $8,000. So we did $5,000 better than
Right.
we would've got for the trade-in. The piece to keep in mind, and I have this in all my docs, my notes in the town warrant draft, is we're gonna have to keep in mind that at the end of the day, $5,000 of that free cash, or $8,000 of that free cash, needs to roll over to be able to go towards the purchase of that fire truck. Because before, it was just the trade-in value of the 3,000, but what happens, we sold it last fiscal, it goes into miscellaneous, non-recurring, right, and then it has to close out into the free cash. But I think that was the year before. Is there another? Oh, you're just looking at the.
When I
current-
looked at because
Okay.
I was remembering, I thought that there
Yeah.
was another surplus command vehicle that we put on Unibid earlier in the year, this year.
I don't think, you know what, Jeremy, I'll check. I don't recall.
Okay.
I know we did a
You
couple
recall?
things, so it's
No.
possible.
Pretty sure there wasn't another
Okay.
vehicle.
I think
My
it was
mistake.
just the fire
Okay.
piece.
I thought
a
I
piece
thought
of
I had
fire.
remembered seeing it in the parking lot here for months and months, and I thought, I might be wrong. Okay, I leave it.
So that's where the local receipts are. So I would say, at this point, as far as, looking at them, I don't think there's a lot of give on any more of those numbers at this point without getting really daring that we're not gonna meet those numbers. Mark, I love your approach of the 2.5%. Might be a little optimistic about looking at the increases in the local receipts. I think it just, we go through, or at least I go through every single number on every single line, look at the history and look at the year-to-dates and try to figure out where we're currently at, what we expect to get in, and what we can put the number in without having heart palpitations that we're not gonna meet them.
I've already waved the white flag on that,
Okay.
because I put in 18,000 and you told us 100, so
Okay,
I'll
you've
take
moved
your
on.
number. I like
And
yours
so is
better.
the number 100,000?
The difference is more than 100,000 from what was on the sheet to that, because it was what, 1,311,000, and our local receipts are 1,426,000.
115.
115,
All right, so that 18,000 now becomes 115,000.
So we're doing okay.
So
at
I
least in
dropped
that.
it to 0.
Yeah. So, new growth, so here's what I'd say this. So I've had several conversations with the assessor's office on this piece. And they're first of all, generally speaking, your assessor's office is always gonna be conservative on this number because that's their job, right? Their job is to say what number they think they can realistically get to, assuming nothing crazy happens. And I think in this past year, they were the number was a little less conservative. I think this number, 75, is probably even potentially a little overreaching at the moment, just because we don't know what's coming down the pipeline this year with new growth. I know, Mark, you're looking at those historical numbers and saying, wait a minute, we always say this and then we get to that, and, I think we do sometimes, and that's really exciting when we do, but I think it's pushing it too much to the 90,000 for them to potentially be able to get to. I think we might end up in a problem if we don't get to that number.
So saying that is 80,000 more comfortable, which would be a $5,000 increase.
So my initial number was 80,000. I know the assessor's office has had lots of conversations and they voted on their number recommendation, and their number came out at the 75. But that's all I can tell you, Steve. It can't,
Yeah.
I can tell you what my recommendation was, I can tell you what their recommendation was.
I don't think that's gonna budge.
Can we get, because there were some emails exchanged, can we get how they calculate to arrive at the 75,000?
I can try. I think it's, a little bit of it's kind of guesswork, right? It's some of the stuff which is what they know has come so far, and some of the stuff is what we think is coming, but we don't know it's coming before June 30th. Unfortunately, I don't think there's like a solid calculation for new growth, right? Like there's not, you take this number, you multiply it by this, you divide by that, you add that, and you get that number. I think it's a lot of guesswork of what they're gonna get to, based on what they know. Jeremy?
No, because I had emailed the assessor, and I understand the formula for coming up with the number, but again, it has, the input is variable and it's a guess. What do you think is gonna, where's your new valuation gonna come from? Is it new construction? Is it major renovation? I think that's the number. I couldn't get a firm answer. I was directed towards the state website, and it wasn't much help, so I understand your concern. It is kind of a guess.
Which another topic maybe we'll get to later on this evening is that kind of plays a little bit back to the Economic Development Committee in terms of getting to the root of why is it as stagnant as it is. So
Right, because, again, looking at all the things that are gonna bring up your economic development, new growth could be potentially huge. You're not talking about putting some small window front businesses in, or if you're either gonna say, put a CVS in, put a Walmart in, or have people come to your town and build that you can assess. It's a solid, it's a big revenue stream. If you're looking at, I think it's something that needs to be looked at really hard. Those numbers that you're looking at, from 2017, 2018, if you're looking at half what you were looking at 5 years ago. That's concerning. Why don't people want to build in Paxton? Why don't people, I think it's worth taking a look at, and as part of economic development, hopefully we can think about that a little bit as well.
Have those discussions happened with the Economic Development Committee?
So, they're working on their next meeting. Stay tuned.
They still have
TBD.
not had another meeting since January?
No, there was a little confusion on one piece, but I'm on it. I'm on it, Steve, I'm on it. All right, ambulance fund. So I know, Mark, you started this out with, here's some great ideas, and folks may tell me no. This is probably the no, right? So it used to be it was 310, we squished it out to 350, right? The notion being that there's more money that came in this past year with all of the mutual aid to Worcester and the billables for that piece. And as we did discuss previously, I think the idea is to start building the money, not only to make sure we have the money next year to have a similar amount, but also to start building so that there's hopefully extra that lands there for the purposes of getting an ambulance. At some point, we are gonna need a new ambulance, and part of the idea is to have funding in that account to be able to do so. The other thing to keep in mind is, while numbers increased this year, and we were doing a lot of mutual aid calls to Worcester, those numbers are starting to drop off, right? One of the reasons we had such a significant number of mutual aid calls to Worcester is because they were having trouble in Worcester getting folks to work ambulances and getting ambulances to respond to the calls. So we were being called
And
substantially.
again, I think, I want to add one thing. In looking at increasing this, it's not as much to do with the mutual aid calls. And I think, yes, it's important to want to put that money in an account to get an ambulance, but these ambulances are staffed with people paid by tax money. These ambulances are bought with tax money. The supplies are bought with tax money. The gas is bought with tax money. The money that comes in as a revenue from what these ambulances are doing, I have a hard time understanding why it goes into a personal fund for the fire department, when it should be going into a revenue fund for the town.
So just to clarify, so it's not going into a personal fund for?
It is, though.
It's a special, It's called ambulance receipts reserve, right?
Okay.
And the only thing you can use that money for is ambulance-related pieces, right? So that's why even with combining the fire and ambulance side of the house, we were still very clear, at least initially, right? First go, to spell those pieces out, because you have to see how the money goes back to the
What
ambulance side
says
of the
that
house.
money only goes to that ambulance, to going for ambulance-related expenses?
The purpose of the fund initially as it was
Okay,
established.
is that a bylaw?
I believe it's actually MGL, but I'll pull it up.
Okay. Because now that changes the narrative.
Of course, Heather, while you're bringing that up, I just think at some particular point, and maybe we didn't do it thoroughly enough, and maybe it's for a post-budget conversation, but I think having a full conversation of that whole concept is appropriate, because I have the audit report in front of me right now. For anybody that cares to know, page 36, where we have ambulance accounts receivable of $638,000, and we have a bad debt reserve of $321,000. That's over 50% of what Jeremy just said. State mandated, otherwise mutual care, mutual aid requirement. We basically have incurred those costs, and I understand free care, but we're eating half of that particular receivable. I know this isn't the private sector, but I'm gonna say it anyways. You'd be out of business if your allowance for doubtful accounts was more than 5%. 10% would be on life preserve. For the last number of years, ours are at 50%. It just seems that there needs to be a little bit more exposure, discussion, what's going on, what can be done better. I don't want to suggest a number in an accusatory way, but I'm an accountant and there are accountants in this room. That's a terrible situation to be in. This seems to me that if we collected all that, we could go buy an ambulance tomorrow, but instead we're writing it off as never going to see it. Meanwhile, the ambulance goes down Pleasant Street. I mean, literally every time I go down, it's coming up, and every time I come up, it's going down. So it's busy, but it's got to be translated into making it meaningful for us. State mandate aside, it just seems it's worth talking about. And maybe the numbers, the quantitative side, there's a whole qualitative side that neutralizes the numbers. But I just think it's a discussion worth having, and I think that's what everybody's around this table is talking about. Let's talk about it, as opposed to not. And there's evidence by it being up there right there. I personally think there's room this year, doesn't have to be 400,000 every year, but this year in this budget deficit climate, to maybe do and dig a little deeper and come up with another 50 grand. You were on Mass General Law.
I was just making sure you're good with that. Okay, so receipts reserved for appropriation, receipts from a specific revenue source segregated from the general fund into a separate fund and earmarked for appropriation for specific purposes by statute. Ambulance receipts is under Chapter 40, Section 5F. For the following purposes, the town may defray the costs, including maturing debt and interest, of acquiring, establishing, maintaining, operating certain facilities and services by charges established by the town upon persons making such use of the services, purchasing, hiring, maintaining, and operating ambulances.
So give me the Evelyn Wood version. Is that saying that,
So those funds
Yes.
received, or those receipts received, right? They have to be used for the purposes of running an ambulance service, so they
then how
have
can
to
we
tie
take,
back.
then we can't even take this 310, is that correct?
No. What we do is, we're taking an amount of money that's less than the cost of our ambulance, the cost to run the ambulance service every year. We can do that, and most towns do that, right? If you have an ambulance, if you have a ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation special fund, which we do, at town meeting, we say we'd like to take this money and put it into the general budget to offset the cost of running the ambulance program. And the ambulance program, you know, we have funds, we can show that they're used for the EMS, the expense lines.
Right.
And those amounts still exceed the amount we're appropriating in, or transferring in. Does that make sense?
It does. And that's the practice that we have done?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what we do, you know, each year, most towns do, right? They take the money that they've collected just for the purposes of, or just from running the ambulance, and then they put it back into the general fund to offset the ambulance service. And
I was gonna ask a question around the 310 to 350. You said that that's been increased in the budget?
So that was through conversation this year with the fire chief, right, of what they felt like they could expend and increase it to 350 from the 310, giving the fact that there's more money, a little bit more money that came in this year from, due to the mutual aid calls from Worcester. But keep in mind that like a revolving fund, that amount carries over. So the special revenue funds as of January shows the total amount currently in that line is $424,635. So we know that's probably going to increase, right? Because billables are always a couple months behind from when you have the incident to when it gets billed to when you collect. And sometimes with insurance companies these days, it seems like even further behind, right?
It really shouldn't be more than, to be honest, it shouldn't be more than 2 months behind, 2 or 3 months behind.
Well,
I've been doing it my whole life. If you're billing it right, if you're doing your job, it shouldn't be more
so,
than 2 or 3 months.
so
behind.
we don't.
I'm just saying.
We use a billing company, right?
No,
We
I
use
know,
Coastal, just like most towns use Coastal. So it
Right.
takes some time to do it. Then you have to collect from the state on any of the patients that are under Medicare, right?
And you
then-
also have to, you're writing off half of it every year, bad.
Well, that to me,
And that's things
just
that
to add
people
on to
don't
that
pay.
point though, the 50%
Yeah.
is I'd love to know how that compares to other places, but that's unbelievable to me. 50% uncollectible.
So keep in mind that that wasn't like last year. That's over a number of years' time. We haven't written off any of our debt for a number of years. So we have to at some point clean that up
Yeah.
and then move
And
forward.
there was a transition in administration there too, so that could, you know,
Well, I think it's just, we haven't,
that
you
could
know,
factor in. I don't, they did things differently under
I
previous
think they said
leadership.
they switched collection companies a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but what we can probably do, Mark, is I can talk to the fire chief and see to what extent we can get the data that says, you know, billable versus collectibles. Right, so that we have all of those numbers and also back up and see how many years this transcends. I don't think this is 2 years. I think this is a multitude of years. I don't think we've written off uncollected debt, to my knowledge. I mean, maybe we have, but in
Well,
conversations, I'm
Well,
not aware.
don't want to be the accounting professor, but the allowance is not that you've necessarily written it off, you're preparing for not collecting it.
Right.
And that's 50%, that's still high. But you said the billing and the revenue is lagging behind, and forgive me for saying what I'm saying, but you're making my point. They've got $424,000 in that account right now, already having given 310 to the town, and revenue is 2 months lagging behind, which would mean that 424 number could be 500, 550, which brings to my point, I think there's room for another $50,000.
Or at least 40,000. 40, 50, yeah, to your point.
But
Because the document I'm looking at, which I'm having trouble rectifying in my mind, that the 310 to 350 increase has already occurred.
What's
yeah,
on,
The document that I'm looking at from 13123.
do you have the first page of your budget?
Oh, okay.
First page of your budget, 350 is baked into the
Got it.
deficit of
All right, so it's not in here.
444.
All
Right.
right, that was my disconnect.
So I'm trying to get another 50 to bring the
Up to 4.
344 down to 294.
I got it.
all right, so attendance receipts. Tree warden, I mean, the possibility with that is looking a couple different ways. Number one, if we're unable to fill the position, that would have to go to the select board and then to town meeting. But potentially to rescind that current bylaw that makes the position elected, make it appointed, and potentially absorb it in one of our current departments. If you were to do that, there's currently a request for funds for trees as well as a stipend for that position. So you could either move the stipend into more tree money, or you could absorb the stipend in the proposed cuts.
Yeah,
So that's possible.
the savings, so to speak, of 10 grand, that department has 16 or 17,000 budgeted, so there would be, if it transitions to the DPW, then the stipend and some of the other costs would transition to DPW in order to do the tree warden types of things. But as you mentioned, in terms of, if nobody fills the position, to my knowledge, they were not nominated at town caucus. Papers have not been taken
Right.
out. And forgive me for saying, but 20 other towns have done it, so, other than Hubbardston, I might know.
We have a
But,
wonderful tree warden.
right. But I would think if all the other towns, all the Wachusett Regional member towns, all the bucket truck co-op towns, all the surrounding towns have done it, Paxton should be able to do it.
So it's on the docket. How's that?
Good.
I can't opine on ARPA. We'll do another, when we do usually at the beginning of April, I think that's the next quarter, end of the quarter, so I'll do another presentation like I've done in the past, several quarters for year-to-date on the budget, and I'll also include an ARPA update on the projects and what's left.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's under the jurisdiction of the select board.
I would just throw out to the Board of Selectmen, I think it would be a nice gesture to find a way to find some of that money to give the budget some relief. That's the message.
As far as number 10 through 13, I think I can work with, if this committee were on board with it, I'd be happy to work with all of the departments and come back with revised budgets next week. I think we could get the numbers down beyond the estimates that are there on the right. Sale of town property, even if 10 West was an option, I don't think that's something we would have taken care of right away. Plus, remember, because it would be a miscellaneous, non-recurring expense, it would close out with free cash. Like, let's say hypothetically, everything goes smoothly, we have $200,000 that come into the town, it's coming in as miscellaneous, non-recurring. We can't touch it until it's certified as free cash. We can't expend it till FY24, after it's certified. So that could potentially, if that were something to work out, and it were to happen before June 30th, that could help towards FY25's budget. If not, and it happened during the course of FY24, it wouldn't help until the following budget, when it comes back as free cash. Does that make sense, Mark? Giving me a look.
Yeah, it makes sense, not the answer I was looking for, but it makes sense, but I wouldn't want that to be a reason not to pursue it. So
Looking at
nobody's
every
gonna say
avenue
that we're gonna be out of the
makes
budget woods next year, so it could be a relief that we're looking for next year, so. I don't think, from a finance committee point of view, I don't see where the town should be in the landlord business. And you've got a building with a willing buyer, I'd move on it.
Same thing with the command car, right? Even if I sold the command car, if the select board voted as surplus, everyone agreed, I sold it on Unibid, whatever, for $20K next week, you're not gonna be able to touch that money until the FY25 budget or sometime in FY24, right? Because you have to wait until the free cash, it rolls over to free cash and gets certified before you can expend it. Stabilization fund, I think we already touched on that piece. I mean, I don't love using it any more than anyone else, but I think at some point it becomes a policy decision about whether or not we look at funding to help stabilize and get us balance for this year, or whether we look at reducing staffing, because we can only cut and reduce so many expenses before it becomes people.
Or service is impacted.
Or major services impacted, but essentially, services get impacted, yeah.
Yeah.
There's some things you can cut and you're gonna impact services, but most of the time, you know, most of your costs and almost all of your budgets are people, right?
So you and Carol and I know well that the financial management policies has a section on financial reserves. In the section basically speaks toward building up those reserves. So I'm not looking to make this to be a 10% habit for 10 years and we have nothing. I'm looking to get us the relief this year with not doing what you just alluded to, which is major cuts in big departments. Personnel suffered from it and service suffered from it. Is this a one-stop relief for 1 year until we can turn the ship around here? That's the message behind that.
That's all I have. You're out of items at 50.
Yep, we covered 15. So
I don't know if Carol has any thoughts on any of those that I
My concern is that, you've said it several times, that this is the biggest deficit we've had. What's the difference this year? And is this going to be a norm? Because we've had substantial amounts of free cash certified, and I see that going down. If we tighten up the budgets and using additional revenues, then we should be seeing less free cash coming in. So got to encounter that next year as well and the year after. But I'm a little bit concerned that we're at this position where the school's gone up 4%. That's nothing unusual for us. It's been higher than that in the past. So why is it so high? And is this trend going to continue? Because we can't sustain that.
well, I would pick up on what the the auditor made mention of on Monday night. And free cash, none of these are going to be very flattering, but free cash comes about in two ways: good fortune or bad budgeting. And he made mention that the particular free cash that we had on the audited statement that he was talking about was $600,000, which one of the points he made is the point that we're making this evening. Revenue came in $200,000 higher than it was budgeted, and expenses were $400,000 less than we had budgeted, which I'd love to have that analyzed and sit here and thinking, where did the finance committee go wrong that the budget came in $400,000 less expenditure-wise than we had budgeted for? I think that's an exercise that every year you should analyze. It's nice that we have $600,000 worth of cash, but how did it get generated? What were the actual results that caused that? And then I'll end by saying, again, the financial reserves are saying, you shouldn't put that in your particular budget the following year. You should put it in your stabilization fund and your capital depreciation fund, so you can buy an ambulance from the capital depreciation fund and not have to have a debt exclusion or borrow or who knows what. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. I think what we're just trying to say is, let's talk about all of them and let's let some of them come into play in a given year and some maybe the following year. But Terenzio stood right there and made that particular remark about kind of what we're talking a little bit about right here, that our revenue was under budgeted.
And I understand that. I'm not saying anything about that. But there's sometimes circumstances that create additional revenue that you're not aware of at the beginning of when you're planning it, and same with the budgeting. And I do know that a year or so ago we changed health insurance. And that was a huge saving, and that contributed to the free cash. Because if you look at what was left over, you'll see that in that account. So there is some things that do happen that you can't foresee when you're budgeting at the beginning of the year. You may, like for instance, the collector may do additional collections for one reason or another, and that's another story. But you don't know that at the beginning of the budget cycle. But all I'm saying is that I'm concerned that we're fighting this, but we've got to deal with 1 year at a time, obviously, at this moment in time, but maybe we should be looking at reducing some of our expenses, because the revenues aren't going to be coming in as fast as our expenses are increasing.
Well, we are going to go through each department, and we are going to, I think, Heather, you said you're meeting with the department heads, and maybe you come back with a bonanza of cuts that we're not thinking or seeing at the moment, so.
Yeah, and Mark, I just wanted to touch on those two pieces. So when I did the budget presentation, and I probably should put this on the web, I don't think I did. So I did break down FY22 and where the numbers landed, right? So we wanted to look at, so any of the departments that were under budget by 10,000 or more, and some substantially, right? We had the employee benefits, so to Carol's point, that was the health insurance. Waste collection, highway department, cemetery, snow and ice, central purchasing, reserve fund, police, and COA were all under budget by more than $10,000 last year. Things that were less than that, like there's I don't know, looks like about 30,000, maybe 40,000 of miscellaneous, like 4,500, 8,000 here, 7,000 there, various departments. And then we also looked at, this year, Carol, to your piece was, how we got to the deficit. So if you look at my forecast, what I have projected was the budget drivers, right? Regional school district, we expected to be around 5%, so that's a little bit less than 358,000, so that's good, it's not as bad. Vocational school district, we estimated at 78,000. Central purchasing, heating, oil, electricity, diesel, we expected to go up about 30,000. Regional dispatch, we expected 75,000, so we saved 5,000 off of that, right? Health insurance, we expected about a 50,000 increase, and retirement, we expected about a $70,000 increase. So we're actually better than what my estimates were, because my estimates were that the budget drivers were going to be about 661,000, putting us, even with revenue estimates at the time, about 546,000 in a deficit. So we have seen, going through the budgets and tightening things up a little bit, we have seen some of that savings. But, all of those pieces are there, right? That's what we did this year. We went through, we analyzed last year for that purpose. So we're trying to start that best practice, right? Mark, go back and see what did we do, what did we didn't do. But I can send this, Mark, to you if you want to send it out to all the FinCom so everyone can have those details. And it also includes, I guess I did spell out exactly how much. For each of these pieces. So it tells you like penalties and interest on taxes was 23,000, which was more than we estimated. Meals excise was 10,000. So it gives you all of those details on all of those pieces, and any of the expense reports I actually had copied and pasted onto here the details of what the numbers actually were. So you guys can have them if you don't have it from, when did I do the presentation, Steve? Do you remember? Fall, November?
That sounds right, yeah.
I think it was November.
So save me a step, send it to FinCom members directly.
I'll see if I have an email with everyone on it. I'm not sure if I do.
Okay. So, moving on to, or closing that and moving on to new business. I have a couple of things under old business. Anybody have any new business?
I'd like to mention a couple things, if I may.
Yeah.
On April 29th, the Massachusetts Municipal Association is holding their one-day training, which I attended last year and was excellent. I highly recommend it. Anybody that's interested and wants the information, let me know. I can forward you an email with the details. So April 29th, A breakfast, continental breakfast, and a full lunch is included. Cost is very reasonable. And since we have a tight budget this year, I'm going to just eat the cost like I did last year, but the point is, it's very reasonable. It's like $35 or $50, whatever. And it's well worth the investment. So anybody interested, let me know. Secondarily, came out today that the governor signed a bill around the extension of the pandemic allowances relative to Zoom meetings and other items. The Zoom meetings and those kinds of things now are extended to March 31st of 2025. So we can conduct business according to open law, meeting law, per the municipality of Commonwealth. So just to let people know, those two items is things I wanted to bring up this evening.
Good, thank you. Under old business, everyone has been sent a copy of the bylaws that we've prepared and we're getting ready to send to the Board of Selectmen. So if you, I guess it would be appropriate to ask if there's a motion to approve the edits and changes that we made from the original bylaws that you approved and agreed to allow to be sent to the Select Board.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, motion passes. The other thing is, in a future meeting notice, I'm going to include as a standard item, reserve fund transfers as may arise, so that if there are none, then we wouldn't act on them. But a reserve fund transfer request came in today at mid-afternoon. In the context, the text of the email said, I know you can't do anything this evening, which we couldn't do anything this evening because it would have been a violation of the agenda that had already been posted, which now we're up against next week and the payment clock is ticking. So if we had had that on this particular agenda to read that way, we would have been able to act on it this evening. So in the future, that's what I'm going to do. And if we don't have anything, we'll just pass over it. And the other thing is, Heather, you said you were on it, but can you expand on the Economic Development Committee a little bit?
Yeah, so there was a little bit confusion of who was going to do the posting of the meeting agenda. So we have a new chair on it. He was good to go with the date, and everyone was good to go with the date, but the agenda and him and communicating it and getting it to the town clerk did not happen when it needed to happen. So by on it, I mean I'm working directly with the chair now to make sure I take the agenda he has and directly get it to the town clerk and make sure he just gets the training and understanding of how to do it. It's our fault internally. We don't always do a great job of onboarding new chairs as to what needs to happen, and it's not always clear. And a lot of times initially we'll try to help someone get off the ground by, doing the agenda, posting everything, and then the second time it's falling through, it's our fault. But we're on it.
Plus, you've got a lot of people on that committee who haven't really been on other committees before. Whatever it's worth, I'll offer any help that I can give to him. I'm pretty good with the procedures and all that, so if he ever needs a hand,
Yep.
give me a ring.
So, but I will take the blame on that one for not coordinating, not educating, and not communicating. So we will get that taken care of.
So we're looking at 2 weeks, are we too late for next Monday? Because I know Monday's got to be the day.
Monday's got to be the day based on one person's schedule.
So it's got to be in tomorrow by COB.
And I will follow up with him as soon as I get this budget review out to you guys.
I know we've got a lot of missteps. and I feel I just need to say this, and it was one of the reasons, many reasons I stepped down. With everything that's gone on, I really have concern that the members that signed up to do this and were excited in January 18th about making a difference and doing something with this committee have got to be discouraged relative to the fact that there's been no movement and no direction and comprehensive, process or any kind of, progress at all. So I would suggest maybe a revitalization of getting these people engaged and excited again may be required.
Well, if we meet Monday, certainly I'll try to inject what I can and hopefully give you a report on it by next Wednesday. But I'm eager to do it.
So two thoughts of that. One is that whole concept of that committee originated at the Finance Committee, and now your charge is we need $329,000 by June 30th. So hopefully you'll meet soon.
Duly noted.
Anything from the public?
One quick question.
Yep.
That senior housing project that we built, do they pay taxes?
Yes.
They do. The reason being I asked that question is when we talk about development of Paxton, well, since we don't have sewers or gas, if we have plenty of land, and that's a nice niche, is to bring in more senior centers similar to that, because they were basically partially federally funded. I remember when I voted on it, and that's one thing to look at on that committee, because industry will not come without sewers, and I don't think we're ever going to see them. And when we looked at when they wanted to put the big housing project in, they were going to have this 150 units with a massive septic system, and then we were lucky enough to get out of that mess and turn it into the more or less aquifer over there. But that's an angle to go, and then they will generate revenue without causing a hubbub, traffic jam, tractor trailers, things like that. And a different citizenship other than that project would have killed the schools because 150 houses with 2 kids in Paxton Center School couldn't handle it. So something to think about. That's it.
And along those veins, and I kind of know, Carol, you agree with this too, would looking at the zoning situation relative to the town be required to make that happen as well?
That
No, it's
answer,
by
I don't
right, I
know.
believe, that type of thing's by right. But just in general, the zoning bylaw needs to be changed because they're not commercial friendly whatsoever.
Right.
That was my point several years ago.
The other thing we have a lot of like halfway houses type thing. I use that term, I'm not sure what they are. Do they pay taxes too, Carol?
I don't believe they do, but again, they're by right. You can't stop those.
You can't do that.
Yeah,
We
those
didn't
are
talk
generally
about that.
tax exempt,
Yeah,
run by a
And-
tax exempt
And you
organization.
can't
just
stop
to
them.
know. Okay.
And I'm assuming that's the same along with the state park we have and not the lakes, what do you call them?
Our state park, which is the Jewel of Paxton.
Yeah,
The only thing I would add to that, it's not, I don't necessarily agree that you can't stop them, but it's just you can't, Heather and I have had this discussion, but you just can't do anything specifically to target them. But
Right.
you could have zoning laws, bylaws, things like that, that talk about non-owner occupied, property, things like that, that would apply to them and any other property that's not just occupied by the primary owner, something that I've suggested before, but is what it is.
So for our next meeting next Wednesday, maybe Heather can come back and talk a little bit further of that sheet that was on the screen, and then tell us the outcome of your meetings with your department heads. Make sense? Motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We stand adjourned.